Good morning, I'm Richard Slater, and on behalf of Lancashire Business View, welcome to the Lancashire Health and Wellbeing Conference. I can't recall the last conversation I had that didn't include some version of the phrases, how are you, how you doing, how's your team faring? And I think that's because we all feel the pain at some point. There's an empathy out there. However, the past 20 months has affected us. It has affected us. So I don't think our timing could have been much better for this event as we move into another significant period of change for our workplaces. Furlough is ending. There's some sense of real life being rebooted, albeit cautiously. These bring their challenges. In business, there's a lot of care being taken. We have to get this right. And that pressure too, it brings more challenges. But we're nothing if not innovative in Lancashire. New strategies for health and wellbeing are created and tested and refined on an almost daily basis in businesses across the county. It remains volatile out there, we know that. We understand the changes that are being made, the stresses on people working at all levels. But again, we can be heartened because of the dedication by so many to making things better. Fundamentally, we need healthy workplaces, healthy workers, and healthy bosses to make healthy businesses. And that is why we're here today, to bring you expertise, ideas, and strategies to help you with your decisions, to help you form the solutions that work for you, for your businesses, for your people, your customers, and your communities, because these things are all connected. Today's agenda covers 2 key headings and 4 connected themes. Our guests are promising a blend of practical advice, insight, and experience. And over the course of panel conversations and interviews, our focus will be on, firstly, people strategies, with a drill down to communication and engagement, and the question, who is checking in on the leaders? Our second panel will consider corporate strategies, furlough, vaccines, returning to work, and innovative workplace solutions. We hope that you'll take some of what you hear and implement it in your workplace. And when you do, Lancashire Business View will be interested to hear more, and we might even invite you to tell us what you achieved at our next Health and Wellbeing Conference. But for today, we welcome your comments, your observations, your questions for our guests. So please do send those through the chat box function. Now, before we begin, a special mention for the organisations supporting this conference. Ladies and gentlemen, please rattle your teacups and dunk your croissants in appreciation of today's sponsors. And they are Breathe Therapies, CG Professional, Lancashire Mind, and Nugent Sante. So let's begin. To open the Lancashire Health and Wellbeing Conference, please welcome Blackburn with Darwen Council's Director of Public Health and Wellbeing, Professor Dominic Harrison. Dominic is the Director, as I've mentioned, of Public Health for the Borough. He's a member of the Blackburn with Darwen CCG Board. He's a visiting professor at the University of Central Lancashire. Previous roles include Deputy Regional Director of Public Health for the Department of Health in the Government Office Northwest, and also for the Health Development Agency as an Associate Director for the Northwest region. Dominic has worked on a number of public health system reviews in Central and Eastern Europe for the WHO, that's the World Health Organization. He's written on public health issues for The Guardian, the Local Government Chronicle, and the British Medical Journal. His principal professional interests are related to health governance, life expectancy, health and the economy, and the health outcome implications of poverty, inequality, social justice, and sustainable development. Over the past 20 months, he's become one of the key faces of the pandemic, a regular fixture on our TV screens. Outspoken, dynamic, he has implemented local test and trace systems and pushed more parochial responses to COVID. I commend to you his Twitter feed. For measured, articulate, researched grumping, he has no equal. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Dominic Harrison. Good morning, Dominic. Dominic, we may need to invite you to unmute yourself, sir.
Good morning, Richard, and thank you for that introduction.
It's our pleasure. You wrote your own CV, sir. Dominic, healthy workforces are vital to a healthy economy. How do the worlds of public health and business come together?
Well, they come together less well than we need, and many of us now are trying to fix that problem. I think, you know, at the broader strategic level in terms of our economic strategy across Lancashire, The revision of our Lancashire economic plans are now including a very strong work stream for health and well-being. And principally the reason is that we know from research by the National Health Service Alliance that a large proportion of our lower productivity below the national average, 30% of it in fact, is due to ill health in the population. And if we had health at the same level as the England average, the productivity gap would reduce, would increase our GDP by about 13.2 billion. And the Northwest in particular, of course, has a bigger challenge here, partly due for historic reasons due to its industrial heritage. But we do have a larger number of people with long-term conditions that either mean they struggle to engage in paid employment, or when they're in paid employment, they're more likely to be sick and therefore reduce the effectiveness of their working contribution to society. And of course, for the individuals, it's avoidable, and for society, it's avoidable. And to fix it, of course, what we need is both businesses and workplaces to be more engaged with us in the wider efforts to improve health and well-being in the population.
What sits behind it, Dominic? What's the root cause that makes our region and our county, what puts us in this position?
Well, if you think about when you look at the epidemiology of ill health, particularly ill health in the adult working population, what you see is a very sharp correlation between income, social class, housing, and health and well-being. And we know that, for instance, Blackburn with Darwen, if you put the population in poorest to richest, Blackburn with Darwen as an example has about half of its population in the poorest 20% in the country. Now that means they're exposed to more risk of all sorts of kinds, both in childhood, which can cast a long shadow forward into adulthood. They're exposed to more occupational risk, something that we've seen during the COVID crisis. More of our population have been out in frontline work, keeping society going, on transport systems, food industries, etc. They weren't able to lock down. That meant they were more exposed to whatever was circulating. And of course, during a pandemic, we had a bigger hit, partially due to the fact that we had less of our population able to work from home. So across Pennine, Lancashire, for instance, we had about 20% of our population who were able to work at home. Places like Richmond on Thames had 71%.
Gosh.
Now that difference caused a very big difference in risk exposure and case rates during COVID. So we had a big hit in Lancashire and in places like Blackburn with Darwen from COVID. But all of those kinds of factors generate a higher risk profile for populations. And of course, the main things that people are at risk from are poorer mental health, poorer cardiovascular disease, and behaviours and lifestyles that generate higher risk of a wide range of long-term conditions.
Thank you. At a previous conference, a health and wellbeing conference, we heard that health aspiration was a problem. There's an expectation in Lancashire that we are going to get ill at some point, and that expectation does not translate to other areas. I wonder if you could comment on that for me, Dominic.
Yeah, I mean, aspiration is a key issue, and we know that in some of our higher risk communities, there are adult populations who have got high rates of diabetes, high rates of heart disease, high rates of being out of the working world because of long-term conditions, and that can generate a kind of normalcy around that. But clearly, I think the COVID crisis has generated a much more nuanced awareness of vulnerability to that. I think, younger generations in particular are wanting to break out of that. And it's critical for Lancashire's economy that we have more of our adults in paid employment in the workforce. And to do that, improving health and well-being is probably our biggest single cost-effective intervention.
Thank you. You mentioned the mental health challenges, and I wonder We have continued uncertainty, continued flux in our workplaces. We've got hybrid models, we've got an end to furlough, we've got pressures that are on businesses brought to bear. What mental health challenges should our businesses be ready for?
Well, I think for many of the workforce who've been working through COVID in the last 18 months, many of them out in frontline work, many of them more exposed, higher case rates, that cohort of the working population will have experienced a much higher level of demand for their work. They'll have experienced possibly some kind of burnout. Many people doing extra shifts if they were out in frontline work, for instance. They may have had family members who've been badly affected by COVID or died. So there will be a large percentage of the population traumatized through working through COVID. Now, there's a second group who have been working at home or possibly not employed, but could be employed, who may well be suffering a loss of confidence to return to work, return to normal life, particularly those perhaps who are clinically vulnerable, may be less willing to come out and risk being part of society, either in mass gathering events or other things. They will need to increase their confidence and capacity to be participating in society, because some of the risks for them, whilst they may be protecting themselves from some exposure to higher rates of COVID that we've seen, continued disconnection from others is probably one of their biggest risks.
Thank you. I mean, we often discuss mental health, and our pages of the last 2-3 years, we've done a lot of work on this in the pages of Lancashire Business View, but often it's from the context of how do we look after the mental health of our people. I wonder, we rarely talk about the mental health of our managers and our leaders and our business owners. How do we persuade bosses to look after themselves, and what do we think works?
Well, I think for bosses, of course, they often bear the brunt of some insoluble problems, wicked problems that don't have an answer, where this way is the right way and fixes the problem and that way doesn't. Often what they end up with is two choices, both of which have negative effects and for which they'll get earache. We have to really help managers and leaders to own up, open up, and to get help if they are having any problems themselves. And really, one of the most effective aspects of leadership in this, I think, is emotional intelligence, and actually talking about what you're feeling alongside what you're doing. And actually that creates an atmosphere in a workplace or in leadership of the sharing and understanding of mental health effects that people are subject to. And many managers have been faced with some of those wicked problems over the last 18 months, and have had to take difficult decisions, either in terms of their own workforce or their workplace or their business. And I think one of the things that is critical is for them to be a bit more open about their feelings in relation to what's happening, and ask for help from colleagues, because I think the more we do that, the more honest and open, the more help and support we are likely to get from colleagues.
Thank you. I'll close for now on this, Dominic. We'll be speaking to you again at the end of the session. We'll close for now with this. Blackburn with Darwen and Lancashire as a whole has gone from among the worst COVID infection rates in the world to amongst the best in the United Kingdom. I wonder what worked for you. What did you learn, and what will you be looking at doing next?
Well, of course, in relation to that, one of the things we now understand from work that we've done over the last 18 months is that some areas in any pandemic or any communicable disease event will be more at risk than others, not because the population is more badly behaved or less likely to obey the rules, but because there are more structural risks in that place. And of course, for Blackburn with Darwen, we had a number of those structural risks. For instance, a bigger percentage of smaller houses with larger families, more of our population out exposed in frontline work, keeping the rest of society going, but putting themselves more at risk. And as a result, you know, during the waves of coronavirus, and we've probably had 4, if you count the latest Delta wave, we have been at the peak in Blackburn with Darwen and in Lancashire of the COVID impact. Now, the key thing we've learned from responding to that is that we need a whole of society response. And I have to say, working with schools, particularly with workplaces, with some of our higher risk settings, such as religious settings, you know, mosques and churches, we've had brilliant support from all of those areas. And I want to say, particularly workplaces, we've had, relative to other areas, relatively few large workplace outbreaks. We have had some in Lancashire, but relatively few compared to other areas. And that's because the leaders and managers of those places have worked very closely with the public health teams in the local authority, followed our advice, taken early action, being open about the risks and the mitigation actions that they were taking. I think where we are now is there is a hidden benefit for us, if we can put it like that, of having had a high level of population exposure. Blackburn with Darwen, for instance, has had the highest cumulative case rate in the country. So in other words, we've had the most people in the country exposed to COVID over the last 18 months. And Lancashire, many areas in Lancashire have followed that, you know, are in the top 20%. Now, as we start a potential exit phase of the pandemic, one of the things that gives us is that we have a higher percentage of our population who are immune from natural immunity. So in other words, we've got vaccinated, vaccination across Lancashire is going well. We've had a good vaccination programme. Most areas are broadly in line with the national vaccination rate, but we have an added layer of protection because a higher percentage of our population than many other areas have also got natural immunity. Now, of course, if you've had COVID and got natural immunity, you still need to get both jabs, but the immunity protection you get is much higher if you've already had COVID and had both, even had one jab and had COVID. So what we know is that as we're exiting the pandemic, Lancashire actually, paradoxically, has had a bigger hit, but is now in a more resilient position. Now, that I think is helping us at this point in the pandemic. But one of the lessons really is that we need to build up with our partners a kind of resilience to shock. And by shock, I mean pandemic shock, which we've had. The next obvious shock coming down the line is going to be some kind of climate change shock. And we've seen evidence of that around the country. And I think the way to build resilience across communities for all of those shocks is by this much closer working together, sharing our skills, knowledge and collaboration, and doing the best we can to improve health and well-being and our economic well-being of our populations.
Dominic, thank you ever so much for now. For Dominic, we thank you for now. We will look forward to bringing you back with us as we wrap up this session, but thank you for now. Now, let's introduce our first panel, where with our themes on communication and engagement and checking in on the leaders, we'll hear what our guests have to say. So please welcome your panelists. Shelley Perry of Breathe Therapies is a multi-award-winning nurse and social entrepreneur. Following her recovery from an eating disorder, Shelley retrained and later founded Seed Lancashire, a charity for anybody affected by an eating disorder. She also founded Breathe Therapies, the not-for-profit arm of Seed that delivers treatment for mental health, eating disorders, obesity and well-being. Shelley, we're going to need to, we've got you on upside down. You're 90 degrees to where you need to be at the minute. You could just do with flipping your camera for us. Tommy McElravy joins us from Lancashire Mind. Tommy has been a charity chief exec for 14 years and seeks to ensure that the lived experience of poor mental health does not stop people from accessing opportunities to thrive. Please welcome also Dr. Adrian Wright, who is the Director of Institute for Research and Organisations, Work and Employment at the University of central Lancashire. Adrian leads a number of research projects in examining work and employment practices. He regularly writes and talks about work and employment and the impact on individuals and organisations that the changing nature of work brings. And please also welcome Tony Garner from Viva PR. Tony and Viva have worked with major blue chip clients such as BAE Systems and Eurofighter. They provide strategic communications consultancy around issues such as recruitment, transformation and business development. But under Tony's leadership, Viva has won a host of industry awards, including the PRCA Agency of the Year, National Ethical Champions, and for particular importance today, earlier this year, Viva landed the PRCA's National Workplace Wellbeing Award. Welcome to you all, and if anybody out there has questions for this panel, please do send them in the chat box. But let me start with you, if I may, Tommy. Tommy, how do we communicate effectively with staff that are now working more flexibly, and what are the dangers if we don't?
Okay, well, good morning, Richard.
Good morning, Tommy.
I think in terms of communicating with staff, I think we have to remember the different things that we do in terms of communication, because there's things that we think we're doing and there's things that we're doing that we don't necessarily think that we're doing. So let me just unpack that for you a little bit as well. So as leaders, we might talk about well-being. We might say there's these different things you can do. You can go and speak to someone, the support in the workplace. We want you to be open about what's going on for you. We don't want you to work overly long hours. We want you to think about your work-life balance. But then if leaders, we can put that in an email, we can have a webinar about that or whatever. But if we as leaders are then sending emails at 8:30, 9 o'clock at night, if we're looking tired all the time and not acknowledging it, actually the non-verbal communication that comes over causes that dissonance, for want of a better word, between what we think we're saying and what we're actually saying.
Thank you. Shelley, can I come to you? How do we ensure that cultures and values can continue to be shared in this environment? There's a hybrid environment, Shelley.
Yeah, and that's something that, thank you for asking that question, Richard. And that's something that we've done a lot of work around for our organisation and our people. And what we found is asking people what they need, and particularly through the pandemic, has been key, because actually people have needed different things at different times and different phases, particularly in the pandemic. So we might have set off with one particular approach and actually a month later that's not working anymore. So making sure that we've got an arena to discuss those things. We have a weekly team meeting to make sure that we're communicating on what are the needs of the team, what are the needs of the business, and what do we need to be doing, what do we need to be changing. And sometimes that's been EFT groups, EFT workshops, sometimes that's been
EFT, what's EFT?
Oh yeah, sorry, emotional freedom technique. Ooh. Yeah, tapping, otherwise known as the tapping technique. And our team have really loved that. But at other times they've said, do you know what, we just feel like we don't want to do that at the moment. And then we've got walking groups where we just go and get outside, change the scenery. We've also installed what we call a culture check. So we brain dumped all of our values as a team and as an organisation, and then each week we talk about how do we think we're doing, are we on track, or have we personally fallen off track, has the company fallen off track, and if so, what do we need to adjust? So really including people's voices and having the team talk to each other and feel valued, and it's that feeling valued that is key to all of that stuff.
Thank you very much. Tony Garner, if I can come to you. I mean, you've won awards for this kind of thing. So what do you think the links are between mental health, productivity, motivation, and how do you deal with that in your business?
Hi, Richard. I think fundamentally it starts with what kind of a workplace do you want to work in yourself, and what do you want to create for people, and then treating people fundamentally with dignity and respect. And to Tommy's point, I feel guilty about the emails at 8:30 are responding to clients and so on. So it is about trying to set that workplace up in a way, create something that you would like to work in yourself, and being cognizant of the kind of stresses and pressures, and not just the workplace ones, but the life ones that your team will be going through. And I think one of the good things from COVID and working from home, because we're a service business, so we're all been on Zoom and Teams and so on, is that you can actually see that the home pressures and the dog barking and
I've had to tidy up.
and the children running through, and the juggling that people have to do to put on a brave face. So we're a relatively small agency in Rosendale, doing the best we can, but we've set ourselves up as like we want to be world class at health and wellbeing, because we can. It's one thing that we can aim to be, and we've taken on a health and wellbeing manager to help us kind of bring some best, look at what good practice is out there, find out what that actually means, and actually bring some process and structure to health and wellbeing. What's
the key outcome today? And I appreciate this is an ongoing process, but what would you recognise as perhaps the key outcome so far with that process, Tony?
Our retaining of staff has been better, and the feedback from the team has been wonderful. So so staff retention is great. So and staff feedback's good. And personally, I feel like we are now doing it properly, as opposed to piecemeal picking at things that when we go on a conference like this and hear about a piece of work or a thing that we can do and introducing it randomly. We've actually got a proper systemized approach. And the one fundamental thing that we've introduced that Tommy will be all over is the workplace wellbeing plans that Mind put together 3 or 4 years ago from the Thriving at Work report that when Theresa May was Prime Minister, if people can remember that far back, that she set in train.
What's changed since then, Tony?
And I think I've got the name right, but the wellbeing plans are a fundamental kind of baseline for people here, and it allows those conversations to be had, because this is what a lot of this is about. It's about facilitating the right conversations at the right time.
Thanks, Tony. Adrian, can I come to you? We've heard a little bit about this, about flexible working means bosses and employees working all hours. How do we advise businesses or bosses and on our workforces when and how to switch off? What are the best rules? What guides can we give businesses here, Adrian, so that the businesses remain strong and healthy in mind and body?
With regard to a lot of the media conversations around a right to disconnect, if you like, it's about being fair to workers, and it's about establishing healthy boundaries, ensuring that employees can switch off and disconnect from work at a time which is right for them. I don't agree with a blanket agreement. I think that some individuals will work in a different way and have different work patterns. For me, what it's really about is thinking about this conversation aligned with job design. What does the job look like? What does the job need? What is the individual needs of people that perhaps have disabilities, have caring responsibilities, those sorts of things, so you can promote a conversation about when and where is the right pattern of work for the individual worker, and therefore you'll get the best productivity out of them, they'll get the best meaning and satisfaction in the workplace. So I think it's a policy that represents the needs of all workers, but most importantly, that no individual is forced to work evenings and weekends, or no individual is forced to reply to an email at a particular time of day, i.e. it can't be held against you if you don't reply at a certain time or a certain date, but the individual needs of the employee and the individual needs of the workforce are discussed openly and transparently.
I understand this. So, but it is a difficult thing. I mean, the rule that we use is I will send emails anytime, day or night, but you're not, nobody's obliged to read them after work hours. But I'm not, I guess sometimes people will read them after work hours. Is that kind of an after hours presenteeism issue that we're creating for ourselves, Adrian?
I think it's about setting the right culture, and it's about setting a culture where individuals can not feel under pressure, not feel that they have to reply, not feel that they have to read an email at 9 o'clock at night. But it shouldn't take away that some people may want to do that, or some people may need to do that that's inclusive of their work patterns. I think presenteeism is always about culture. Presenteeism has to think about the well-being of the workforce and make sure that we guard against work intensification and those sorts of things.
Thank you. I'm really intrigued. I'm just going to move the conversation a little bit now towards that idea of leaders looking after themselves. But as part of this, I'm really interested to know how you might have changed as leaders over the last 20 months, given the pressures and the stresses, but also the need to be nimble and work with, understand your people and the empathy piece. I am interested in that side of it as well. So, but I'll start with you, Tony. Emphasis is usually on the health and well-being of employees. What about yourself, and what about the bosses that you deal with, that you work with? How are they holding it together, and how are you holding it together, and how have you changed, Tony?
I think this is the real difficult one, and it depends, I guess, where you sat on this. But in a commercial environment, it's really, really difficult to show any vulnerability, because we are in a commercial environment. I'm up against other agencies, and and I have these conversations not just with other people who are in running small businesses like ourselves. You've really got to be careful how you expose yourself to the outside world, and it would take a brave owner manager to talk very publicly about suffering from anxiety or depression, both internally with their teams, but massively out in the outside world, because I know we have to pitch for work, and if the decision, and it often is, on a knife edge, am I going to put myself in a stronger position by being very open and honest about my weaknesses, and by putting that out there, or there being a bread trail to people finding that, or being very kind of alpha male about it? I'd love to be in a position to be very open and honest, and I have a lot of these conversations privately. Just had a brew the other day with a mutual friend, Richard, who you know really well, who suffers from depression, but he has never ever made that public for precisely those reasons, because he owns a small business that he, rightly or wrongly, and I'd say probably rightly, feels that he would lose work from two rivals, because people would go, not sure whether this guy's going to be able to turn up or deal with the pressure that I might be able to put him under. And that's the reality from a kind of commercial leadership.
Tony, that's great, Tony.
Sorry, yeah.
No, you're right, Tony. That's fantastic. But it takes me right into Tommy, I think, with this. Tommy, that's a really good point, isn't it? That's an impassioned point that Tony's making there. You and I spoke the other day, and we had a conversation about it's good to show vulnerability, or vulnerability is strength. But the way Tony paints it there's a real life story there. So what additional pressures are there on the bosses of small or whatever size businesses, and what support is there? What can you do to help them there, Tommy?
Well, firstly, just before I answer that, I think there is a really important point there about knowing what's at stake in disclosure. And that's why we talk about vulnerability as being a strength, because it's actually a skill as well to know when to disclose and how to do that in a safe way. And often when you're in the middle of something, you can disclose to someone really close to you that you trust, but often you have to be a little bit further along the journey with that, to share that and make that a positive learning experience for people around you. And it comes back to the stuff that Adrian said about culture as well.
Yeah.
You know, if you've created a culture where you can share your own vulnerabilities within that and within your team, and your team aren't going to go blabbing everywhere about that, there's that mutual understanding that you're both going to, that everybody in that is there looking after each other. Because things like resilience exist for a reason. So if you're in the armed forces and you're stuck in the desert and you're on your own and you need to get back to, you know, where your troops are or whatever, and what's at stake is life and death, then you do keep going. You do keep going, whatever injuries, mental or physical, you're carrying.
Yeah.
But in the workplace, it's very rarely about life and death. So that understanding of what's at stake is part of that skill of using vulnerability as a strength. If you can step outside for a minute and think, well, actually, what is at stake and where is it at risk? So what Tony describes is very real, and people, you know, clients will bear that stuff in mind. So yeah, I get where he's coming from.
Thank you, Tommy. Shelley, if I can come to you, what issues do presenteeism bring for bosses? Do you think? What additional issues are we causing for ourselves as bosses by insisting on being there for everybody all the time?
Yeah, I think potentially if we do that, and if we're running at full throttle and not taking that time for ourselves and not looking after ourselves, then actually we're not going to be as resilient. We're not going to give the right decisions at the right times. So we're actually not going to be that rock that people need. So it's a bit like the analogy of being in an aircraft, where if the aircraft is going down, we take the oxygen and we take it first before we give it to our children. And that's what bosses need to be doing as well, and really taking care of ourselves so that we can take care of our teams.
Thank you very much. Who have I not spoken to? Adrian, it's you. I've got one for you. This has come from our audience, and I like this question. This is from Jason Kingston, who's a director at Cube Thinking. Adrian, I wonder if you could observe on this. Do you see a new type of leader with a different type of strength and compassion that actually and sincerely values the well-being of others? Are we changing as leaders, do you think, Adrian, or are we kidding ourselves?
I'm going to be optimistic on this one, Richard, and say yes. I think that the pandemic and the experiences that we've all had to endure over the last 18 months, I hope is a step change for leaders, for businesses, in the way that they operate within themselves, but also in the way that we deal with employees. It's important that we don't go backwards. It's important that we kind of look to the future and find a new way to manage employees and also manage ourselves. We had issues with productivity prior to the COVID pandemic, and we had issues with workforce well-being prior to the COVID pandemic as well. It's really, really important that we learn from this experience, and I think the phrase is build back better.
We'll have that one in the context that you've just described. You can choose your context for other places. Ladies and gentlemen, would you please thank our first panel, Shelley Perry, Tommy McElravy, Adrian Wright and Tony Garner. Fantastic, thank you all. Now we're going to move swiftly into our second panel, where our focus will shift a little to the practicalities of dealing with more changes in the workplace. This is our corporate strategies conversation. Now, furlough is coming to an end. Vaccinations are advanced, but bring challenges for bosses. The simple act of returning to work is causing headaches that we didn't know we had. And we'll take time to probe our guests also for the kinds of solutions that we feel are working. So please welcome your panelist. From CG Professional, Heather Orst, an employment law specialist and partner. She's an expert in legal health and wellbeing, as well as an advocate for healthier workplaces. Paul Nugent of Sante Group is a key figure in the private medical insurance and wellbeing sector. He formed Nugent Sante to help make people's lives easier by delivering innovative health and wellness strategies and products. The Sante Group now partners with blue chip insurers and health providers to deliver health and financial protection services. Julie Blinko, director and co-founder of the Business Health Institute, and they provide high quality health and wellbeing services to businesses specializing in stress and burnout. Underpinning her passion in wellbeing is the need to look at organisational values and cultivate them to create a flourishing workplace, and she sees a strength as an ability to open the lines of communication between clients and businesses to get projects over the line. David Gorton is a partner at PM&M, and he is partner in their audit, accounting and advisory team, and specialises in corporate transactions, audit and tax, as well as business advice. As the practice's international liaison partner, he helps UK businesses get advice from PM&M's allied accounting firms across the world. Throughout the pandemic, David has stayed in close contact with his clients, the PM&M team and strategic partners, helping minimise the impact of COVID-19, guiding them as they adapt to a new working environments and identify opportunities. Welcome to you all, and glad you're all here. How is everybody today?
Thank you, Richard.
Oh, they always want me to go straight to the questions. I'll go straight to the questions. Heather, the end of furlough, we're going to bring new problems to the fore. These are the forgotten furloughed, perhaps. They're the last to return. They might have health issues or caring responsibilities. How do we bring those people back appropriately into our workplaces, and how do we ensure no one is left behind? Heather? You're muted, so sorry. What a pity. Did you hear the question okay, Heather?
I did, absolutely.
In which case I shan't repeat it because it's a very long one.
Yeah, no, I've just been looking at the numbers, Richard, in advance of this session, and probably still looking at about 1 million people that might be using the furlough scheme until it ends at the end of September, just over a month left. I think there was a lot of, there's been a lot of talk about actually the demographic of those that have been left on furlough. At one point, there was quite a lot of young people on there, but also quite a high proportion of older workers. But as you've hinted at there, what we have seen in practice is that the furlough scheme has been fantastic to support businesses and to support individuals. And sometimes there's been a combination of it working for the individual and it being okay for the business because the government is providing that financial support. And sometimes it's been more one-sided, shall we say, you know, it's been the company's decision, look, we really do need to place you on furlough, please. But sometimes it has been partly because of that person's individual circumstances, including things like their own health issues, perhaps being clinically extremely vulnerable, or caring responsibilities for other people at home. So what I'm anticipating now is that as we're nearing the end of the furlough scheme and that financial contribution from the government is tailing off and actually going to be completely cut at the end of next month, I'm anticipating that some individuals that have been furloughed potentially for quite long periods are going to struggle. If employers are ringing them up on a Monday afternoon and saying, great news, Heather, you're back in work tomorrow, if that person's circumstances are such that actually they have got mental health issues, perhaps anxiety around coming back to work, they've been struggling with depression, that's going to be very difficult for them to manage. Equally, if it's because actually they've been spending their time whilst furloughed caring for people that are either, you know, suffering from COVID or again clinically vulnerable, mental health issues, then again to suddenly switch that off is not going to be great. So I think it's about being reasonable, providing reasonable notice where we can, keeping in touch with people. When people are on long-term sick, most employers are pretty good at having a process that they deal with. They have welfare meetings, they have check-in, they might refer them to occupational health, they might be getting advice in. People on furlough have been a bit forgotten, I feel, and while they're just furloughed, they're over there. The reality is, if we know that they're having health problems, we know that that's part of the reason that they're being furloughed, perhaps, or they've got other things going on, we should be staying in touch with them so nothing comes as a big shock, and hopefully the individual is able to come back as the employer wants.
Thank you. David, if I can come to you. I'm considering or reflecting on your own business, and that's a good sized business, and reflecting also on you know, your many clients which do cross sectors and they cross the sizes. What are the sense of the issues that are coming through with yourself and with businesses around you, and how are you managing them, and what are you seeing working?
I think there's a huge sector difference kicking around. We're in professional services. We use furlough quite extensively last summer, and we dropped down to having maybe 2 or 3 people on furlough by autumn, and they were all, as Heather was just saying, they're people with individual difficulties. They're people with caring responsibilities or health issues that makes it difficult for them to come back. And those are ones where, because we're professional services, we can manage working at home. We can find part-time working, and that can work quite well. And reintegrating those back in our world is actually not that hard. If you move to my manufacturing clients, I mean, I'm at least Length practice, we do lots of manufacturing. The manufacturing clients, if you've been on furlough since last summer, pretty much the organisation has moved on. It's really difficult now to be saying, well, manufacturing production levels are really high. Manufacturers are very busy. If they are coping without that person now, the chances are that the role is slipping to redundancy.
And that's a worry, because I wonder, Paul, do we sometimes lose the human story here while we're managing our businesses? How do we keep our eyes on the responsibilities we have to people, Paul, as well as to our businesses?
I think that's people is the focus, isn't it, really? Because without the people, there is no business, really, unless you've moved to that sort of digital way. But the fact is, with people on furlough, I know it's been difficult for employers to contact the staff, because Heather might, talk about that later, but the laws on what they can do. But I think what we've got to do is focus on the people, and there has to be some way. Every workplace is different, whether it be manufacturing or office. Offices are much easier to get in touch with people. But I think what businesses need to do is realise that every business is different, and there could be an age difference, a culture difference. So there's many ways of connecting with people. Usually it is digital, which again is difficult in manufacturing construction. But really, I mean, what we've done is we've engaged with our employees. We're very lucky because we are a sort of office-based organisation that uses computers all the time. But we have been in contact every month with our employees, and every 3 months we've sent out a questionnaire, and not based on, it can be live things. We bring back MI to see how people are going and how people are faring. So communication is absolutely key in whatever method. I mean, even in the construction and manufacturing, the smartphones and things like that. So check-ins that people were mentioning early on is absolutely key to it. And I think what workplaces have to do is try and demonstrate that coming back, make your workplace a nice place to be, a supportive place to be. And I think talking about the management team, regular management meetings to gauge how you're all doing, then you've got your support. We've managed it. The pandemic for us has brought us together as a management team, because we've kept regular meetings and we know each other. To that end, what I've done is I've set up a camp so that our management team are going away, and 6 of us going away to the Lake District to get together later on, just to sort of bring us all together even further. So just things like that, really, and people are the absolute focus.
Thank you. Julie, the Business Health Institute, tell us what are the clients saying? What research are you doing? How are you guiding or advising on furlough vaccines returning to work?
That's not really our area specifically on vaccines and furlough and returning to work. However, what we do is we're kind of focusing on the gap between the vision of the organisation and the action that they're taking. And we believe that's achieved through analytics. So we use both group analytics and personal analytics in a very confidential way for the organisation, because the crux of it is that organisations want their people to perform the best they can. And how do they do that without knowing exactly what's going on with their people? I think one of the key things is over the pandemic is that everybody's experienced some kind of challenge. But I was reading an article yesterday, for example, that said, people aren't looking at a solution for one, one size fits all anymore. We're looking at what does each employee need, and that's why we use kind of analytics and to get to what the organisation, how can your workforce best achieve your vision.
Julie, do you think the circumstances that we've found ourselves in the last 20 months are accelerating that idea of effectively personal plans for individuals within the organisation? Do you think that's been given a turbocharge?
I definitely think so, because when you look at what's happened, everybody, leaders, panel A spoke so much about the lead as an individual and what their requirements, and everybody that contributed. It was so correct then that what everybody's experienced, everybody's dealt with so much change. Yeah. There's been no psychological safety. As a leader, you're dealing with what's happening with your family, for example, but you're also dealing with constant updating legislation. Absolutely. Where's this information coming from? How do I implement that with my team? How do you actually come back to some sort of normality, and how do I really know what's going on with myself, never mind my people? That's why we believe that analytics fills that gap, and that's what we are here to do.
No, that's terrific. Thank you very much. And I would be remiss of me not to take advantage of the lawyer in the room, because I'm not going to name the people who've asked me this question, but there's more than one who've asked me this question. Heather, what can we do about vaccinations at work? Can we insist on vaccinations? What are the legal niceties around that? In about 30 seconds, I realise this is probably a 47-page paper, but we haven't got 47 page worth of time. Heather, where do we start with that conversation?
Well, I guess the short answer is that currently it's not mandatory for anyone to be vaccinated, and employers generally can't mandate it. Is really the short answer. CQC registered care homes, there is that change coming in place from October in terms of requiring certain people to be vaccinated. So putting those to one side, but not forgetting about them. So ignoring that care setting just for a moment, for the majority of employers, it's not something that's necessarily appropriate. However, I have been talking to a number of clients who are keen to know the vaccination status of their employees and are wanting to know, can we ask that? How do we deal with that? There's obviously data protection implications. For those interested, the ICO has got a really good summary and overview of it. The short version of which is, you need to have a real clear, transparent reason for needing that information. And you've got to think about, actually, what are you going to do with it? So, the idea of asking somebody to show you their COVID pass that they can show you on their, on the NHS app, that isn't processing personal sensitive data. So that's okay. And some people need to do that now, thinking about the self-isolation rules have changed, for example, for those that are double vaccinated. So they might just want to check that or ask for that. But if they're doing anything with it, you've got GDPR implications. And you've got to bear in mind that there might be really good reasons why people aren't vaccinated. So the key thing from my perspective is, we can't discriminate against people who might be sort of have religious or medical reasons or disabilities, or it might be linked to pregnancy or childbirth or something like that as the reason why they're not being vaccinated.
I think the even shorter answer is, you're going to have to check with your lawyer and your HR advisors, because this may well be a moving feast, ladies and gentlemen. Let me move on. I did have a question written, and I'm going to change it because there's a much better version of a similar question come to me. And this is from Tracy Clark, who's trading manager at the Oxfam Poulton branch. This is the question which I'm going to put first to Paul. Paul, if I can come to you first on this. What advice do you give for motivating your team during this difficult time, that doesn't cost a fortune? What advice? How can we keep our teams motivated at relatively low cost or zero cost?
Well, I can only go back on what we have done, with our team, because we've been so connected throughout this, and we've done sort of little challenges together. We've got a little app that we use that we do bits of walking challenges and that sort of thing. And really, I think, is try and get a community together in some respect, you know, whether it be, I mean, walking and things isn't for everyone. But, you know, when we have been into the office, then we've tried to sort of take out of the office a little bit. You know, when the pub across the road opened, we went out, you know, socially distanced, obviously. But I think, remember that you go to work probably most of your hours in your week. And, you know, I think if you can create a bond between your teams and the communication and just create a community as well as coming to work, but just to sort of be friendly as well. So that can be done on a whole sort of, whether it be meetings on Zoom, whether it be a quiz at night, or just things like that, thinking outside the box and not actually just coming to work to be at work. So just extracurricular stuff, really.
Thank you very much. David, what innovative solutions that have you seen in terms of engagement, communications, all that good stuff? What have you seen work either in your own businesses or elsewhere?
There is communication is the absolute key in it, and sharing values is right. You know, making people think that there is a world that isn't pandemic driven, that there's stuff that's happening that people need to be part of. I mean, one of the real challenges we found is bringing new team members in. And how do you bring them into how do you motivate a new team member who doesn't have that sense of community at the start in a world where it's difficult to bring people into place? So that's one of the things where we said you have to come into the office. New team members must come in. We must find a buddy for them that they spend a lot of time working with, and then everyone else loves that there's new people coming in. You can get a real inspiration in a team that we are committing to the future, that we're growing, and you can leverage that commitment from the firm to new people, to training new people, to bringing it through. But other than that, it's communication, it's listening, not just communicating out, but listening as much as we can, and you know, surveys, informal hookups, finding as many different ways of getting information from people, making sure that people know that they are valued, that team members, that their thoughts count. I'm doing too much talking. Richard's nodding at me like he needs to move on, so I shall.
That's just so untrue. You're very perceptive. Thank you, David. Julie, to you, what I want to ask. We've learned a lot over these last 20 months, Julie. How much of it should become business as usual for us?
I think it's an opportunity for organisations to reset, to relook at their culture, values, and what they want to achieve going forward, what kind of business they want to achieve. And I think it's a real, you know, historically, I think we've looked at businesses very strategically, and in some cases, I'm not saying everybody, but in some cases, we've forgotten about the human element and how, you know, what our human elements, the can do and the will do is to achieve those objectives. And I think, yeah, definitely, you know, as Adrian said on panel A, I think it's an opportunity for reset and looking at going forward in a different way, and we are seeing that with organisations, definitely. I think it's a platform for new ideas and new opportunities.
I think you're right. Heather, finally to you on this one. What are you going to stick with that you've learned over the last 20 months? It's like a personalised version of the question I just asked Heather there, I guess. What have you learned? What's going to become your version of normality? What have you learned, and what are you going to retain from the last 20 months?
I think I personally have learned the brilliant balance of some time working at home, some time working in the office. I think the importance of connection with people, with a team. I've changed job during the pandemic and joining CG and coming to manage the employment team here. And it's been so important getting to know the team, what they need, their individual circumstances, having regular one-to-ones. And that's something that I would always carry on, but I think it's been particularly important and something that you've got to prioritise as a leader in a business, but also just as a manager generally.
Thank you very much. And thank you to all our panelists there. That's Heather Orst, Paul Nugent, Julie Blinko and David Gorton. Now, before we close and drift into what will inevitably be the chaos of online networking, I'd like to welcome back Professor Dominic Harrison. In the meantime, oh, no, I think Dominic's here. Good. Dominic, great. Dominic, from the perspective of a public health leader, what have you made of the thinking and the strategies and the experiences outlined by our guests on our panels? Oh, Dominic, I'm sorry, if you could just unmute, sir, please.
Apologies. An excellent discussion from both panels, some really good questions. I think some key points, some key standout points for me were really around, I would summarize it by saying, I think there's a consensus that as we come back in a post-COVID world, we need to do more to humanize the workplace, to create a kinder environment and to be more connected, both physically and, you know, by phone and through other events, and to realize that if we create, I was very taken by the comments, Tony's comments at the beginning, is the question we need to ask ourselves is, what kind of workplace do I want to work in? You know, and none of us are outside of the realities we're trying to change or create, you know, and so we just need to apply that. I worked with an occupational health doctor who was the head of a major national company. And when he talked to me about staff he'd had to sign off sick, he said there was almost no case where the person didn't have challenges both in their home life and in their work life. He said if people were under stress at work, they could mostly cope with it as long as home life was okay. If they were under stress at home, they could cope with it as long as their work life was okay. But when they both coincided, that was when people fell over. And I just think as an insight, that's critical, especially in the post-COVID world, because what we need to do is to see ourselves and each other as whole people, you know, and to do what we can to connect perhaps more in a more holistic way with our staff and with each other. And the comments that were made around vulnerability and resilience, you know, I totally get the fact that people are nervous about putting out into the public domain, especially at the wrong time, issues to do with their own vulnerability. But I do think that society is moving on. We can see through a lot of social movements around, particularly around mental health in the last few years, that we are getting more sophisticated at understanding causes and effects. And I think a much higher level of personal and collective vulnerability, but matched with an increasing willingness and an ability to be resilient to that vulnerability, is going to be what's valued in the future. Because actually being vulnerable but not resilient leaves you very brittle. And actually it's the people that do not open up, do not share their challenges or vulnerabilities, that end up falling over first. And I think that's a really important lesson we've learned in a number of different domains over the last few years.
Thank you. I mean, is there any way that we can, or even should we, try and further align the objectives of public health and the objectives of business? And if we are going to try that, where will we start?
Well, I absolutely think that is one of our highest priorities, both for economic reasons, especially in the Northwest and in Lancashire, you know, because of the issues I mentioned at the beginning, which is that we've got a much higher level of sickness absence related to ill health. Yeah. But also because of, you know, as a society, as a community, we want to have levels of health and well-being that at least equal the best in the country. And to do that, we need all of us taking a role. My picking up on a number of the programs that have been mentioned and a number of the interventions, my best recommendation is, some of you will have heard of this, but there's something called the 5 Ways to Wellbeing, which was a program started by the New Economics Foundation based on public health knowledge and research. And the theory behind it, of course, is that what you need in order to thrive as an individual, as a community, as a group, is to maximize the ways in which you can live your life, either at work or in your broader home life, to give yourself the best chance of mental, emotional, and physical well-being. And those 5 ways to well-being have already been mentioned implicitly. So just to remind people what they are, you can Google it and you'll get a lot on this. But the 5 ways are connect. Connect more to other people. We know people are more resilient, mentally healthier, emotionally happier if they're connected to more people. And the opposite's true. If you're not well connected socially, emotionally, physically, you are more at risk of mental ill health. So connect is the first one. Be active. Physical activity, 3 times 30 minutes a week, critical as a baseline to keep you well and healthy, including mentally healthy. Much better if that's outdoors as well, rather than just turning up to the gym and standing on a treadmill or running on a treadmill. So be active is the second one. Keep learning. A number of people have mentioned, things move on very rapidly. It's critical that we all are learning a new skill, possibly particularly digital skills these days. The more we keep learning, the better. Volunteer. There's a lot of evidence to show that if we volunteer, do things that we're not required to do, but are examples of kindness to others and to the community, that improves our own mental well-being and, of course, creates a better society. And the final one is, and I think this is something people have picked up a lot during the last 18 months, the final one is take notice. Now, this is about being present. A lot of us spend our lives with our heads thinking about failures or things we're worried about in the past, or creating impossible plans for the future, but often don't spend time noticing the people we're with, the place we're with, in the present. And actually, we know that people who are good at taking notice of being present with others and in their workplace, in their lives, often have much better mental and emotional health. So take notice is a really important one.
Thank you ever so much, Dominic Harrison. Ladies and gentlemen, you will find in the chat box, we've just shared a link to the 5 ways that Dominic's there describing. Dominic, we're grateful for the work you do. We are grateful for the noise you make, and I am grateful for your impassioned scrutiny of government. Sir, it's been our pleasure. Thank you for joining us today. Because, ladies and gentlemen, at Lancashire Business View, we never, ever tire of experts. That concludes our formal business today, but stay with us for some informal networking. Thank you all for tuning in, for your many and varied contributions. Thank you particularly for those who sent us questions, and particularly those who I didn't get a chance to ask those questions. Thank you to our guest speaker, Professor Dominic Harrison, to all our panelists for your insight and expertise. That's Shelley Perry, Julie Blinko, Heather Orst, Tommy McElravy, Paul Nugent, David Gorton, Adrian Wright, and Tony Garner. And to Lancashire Business View's partners on this event, Breathe Therapies, CG Professional, Lancashire Mind, and Nugent Sante. Thanks too to our friends here at Big Tank Video Productions for their televisual expertise, and to my team, or our team rather, at Lancashire Business View for pulling the backstage strings. The story of this conference will be reported in the September-October issue of Lancashire Business View magazine, our 100th edition. And the whole conference will be available to watch back on demand by tomorrow. Fundamentally, we hope that today's conversations are the beginning, that they start many, many more. Our speakers and our sponsors would welcome those conversations. See how they can help your business or your clients. They will welcome your call. As we've heard, everything is connected. Good business, good health, good well-being. So let's keep connected. Finally, if you can buy it in Lancashire, buy it in Lancashire. And if you can sell it round Lancashire, you can sell it round the world. I've been Richard Slater on behalf of Lancashire Business View. This has been the Lancashire Health and Wellbeing Conference. Thank you to you all.